Hello, I'm Kevin Gibbons. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Clinical Affairs at the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences here in Buffalo, New York, and the Executive Director of UBMD Physicians Group. I'd like to take this opportunity to give you a September update on the status of COVID-19 in our community and our country. I'd like to screen share with you now. And the topics I'd like to go over, starting off, of course, of where we are right now and why. I also invite you to check out previous presentations at ubmd.com or available on YouTube. I'll spend considerable time discussing the Delta variant, what makes it so uniquely successful as a virus. We'll spend time talking about vaccines, the important issue of our children in COVID, and the important issue of pregnancy in COVID. And I'd like to spend some time at the end talking about what the near future is likely to hold over the next few months. So here we are currently, as of this week, the number of new cases. Clearly, we have our massive spike in the winter. You can see now a spike that began in the middle of summer. This is the Delta spike. Hopefully, it may be flattening out a little bit. I'm going to point out to you that the number of hospitalized in this country has gone up dramatically with this last spike, and the number of deaths in this country has gone up dramatically with this spike. That's a different picture from another country with a very slightly better vaccination rate. And I'll point that out in some pretty dramatic slides in this presentation. The crude numbers are important. As noted, the cases down 12% over the last 2 weeks. That's 132 cases per day on a daily average. Remember, we were down to 11,000 cases a day 2 months ago. We were close to getting below that 10,000 number, where there's a good chance you'd see a dramatic reduction and almost elimination of COVID. I'm going to point out to you that deaths continue to increase in our community, up 31% over the last 2 weeks, 1,300 people a day. It's so important to keep that number in mind. If someone talks to you about the risk of vaccination, it's way, way lower than that. Over the course of a year, much less than 1,300 deaths a day, which is what we're seeing. In terms of vaccination rate in this country, 62% of all citizens have one dose, 53% are fully vaccinated. It's important to realize that children, 25% of our population, 80 million people, have had limited access to the vaccine so far. So those numbers suggest that the majority, a significant majority of adults have been vaccinated. And of course, the majority of our kids have not been vaccinated. It's important to note, again, that in the UK, those numbers are 10 to 15% better. And I'll show you the difference that makes in their mortality rates. So these are the kind of headlines we've been looking at for the last 2 weeks as the disease started up again in the Midwest with the Delta variant, went down the Mississippi, hit the Southwest, hit the Southeast, particularly hit Florida hard. In the lower right-hand corner, you see the question, what went wrong? Well, very simply, what went wrong was Delta. This is what happens when the basics of virology and evolution combine. Very simply put, a virus infects a single cell. It makes 1 million copies of itself. 99% of those copies have flaws that usually are failures. And 1% survive in the copied virus. So that's 10,000 new viral particles from a single cell. But what happens if just 3% survive? Well, that's 3 times as many. What if of the 99% of, quote, bad copies, there's one mutation that's actually faster, more effective at transmission, which clearly Delta is, more lethal, which Alpha was, or evades our immune system, which none of these have done quite yet. Well, in short form, Delta is more adherent. It has to do with how quickly the spike protein unfolds. One virus infects a cell, that cell fuses with another cell. The virus has now taken over the replicative mechanisms of 2 cells, so it makes at least twice as much virus, and it replicates much faster. You see release of viral particles in less than 48 hours, and the peak viral release is actually about 3.5 days. So an incredible amount of virus more rapidly produced. The graph in the lower right-hand corner shows how quickly in red that Delta variant took over the spot of the Alpha variant as the #1 virus in England. So The CDC put out some controversial statements a couple of weeks ago saying that Delta was as contagious as chickenpox. And the CDC says yes. And a lot of experts said, well, not really. Well, actually, they're both right. And in this situation, I'm afraid the CDC is more right. And I'm going to show you why. And I have to get a little technical here. There's something called the concept of the basic reproduction number, and it's a theoretical model. And it's how many people does a single infected person subsequently infect in a population without any immunity and a population not taking preventative measures, not doing social distancing or masking through one round of transmission. Really important point. So with measles, it's 18. With chickenpox, it's thought to be 10. SARS-CoV-2, one of the original viruses from last summer, it was 2. The alpha, it appears to be 4. Delta is now up to 6. This contrasts with what we call the RT, which is the real transmission number. And that's a number that floats above or below 1. If it's greater than 1, the disease is expanding in our community. If it's less than 1, it is decreasing in our community. It's best to think about this in big numbers. Like if you have 100 patients this week, do you have 80 next week, meaning the disease is going away? Or do you have 200, meaning it's doubled in the course of a week? So is the SARS-CoV-2 Delta variant as infectious as chickenpox? Well, with chickenpox, the R is 10. But the flip time or cycle time is 10 days. So if day 0, you have 1 person infected, day 10, you have 10, those 10 each infect another 10, day 20, you have 100, those 100 each infect another 10. So by day 30, you have 1,000. Measles, which is the ultimate in contagious viruses, has an R naught of 18, but the incubation to contagious time is 14 days. So it's actually more people, but slower. Well, the Delta variant at 3 days with an R of 6, that look, you can see where those numbers go, such that, day 27, 1 person has resulted in 10 million infections, and day 30, 10 million times 6 is 60 million. Now, this is a theoretical model, but all models are incorrect, but some are useful. This gives you an idea of why the Delta variant is so wildly spreading in areas where patients are not vaccinated. So this results in the exponential rise and fall of a virus. Now, it's important to note that that fall doesn't occur simply because the virus itself gets tired. That fall occurs because, for example, the upper graph here in India is because there are dead bodies in the street and in the Ganges River, and people are running out of oxygen. Hospitals are running out of oxygen. People take behaviors that cause that rapid fall. In the lower graph, you see this is the UK. Here's that big alpha spike they had in January. And here they are in the spring with the Delta spike, rapid up, rapid down, but now flat to going up a little bit. That's a worrisome thing. So Delta, in short, more virus, quicker replication time, is clearly more contagious across a population than any other virus we have seen. Now, does it cause more hospitalizations? That's uncertain per case, because there's a study out of Norway that suggests that it's the same as the previous version, Alpha. There's one study out of England that suggests it could be twice as likely to result in hospitalization. Is it more likely to infect kids on a per population basis? The answer is probably not, but kids are our largest group of unvaccinated individuals. So that's why we're seeing this spike in pediatric cases. So I'd like to point out the effect of vaccination in the face of Alpha and Delta and what it does for death rates. The graph on the right shows you how quickly Delta took over in the United Kingdom from the orange, which is the Alpha. The blue graph is cases. The gray graph here is number of deaths. It's the same time frame or axis along here. So in the spring, tremendous number of deaths in 2020. This is when it went through our elderly population, patients age 80 and up with a 25% case fatality rate. Then it came down. Then they had a fall spike, which they started to control. You can see it here in number of cases. And then Alpha took over, shot up, the death rate shot up. They employed an aggressive 1-dose vaccination strategy because 1 dose is enough to prevent death and hospitalization with Alpha. And both curves come down very rapidly. Then in the spring, they gave everybody their 2nd dose because the information coming out of India, although limited, stated that one dose against Delta was not enough. You needed 2 doses of the mRNA vaccine to be effective. So they aggressively vaccinated their population to the point where they're about 10 to 15 percentage points above the US now. And the end result is that although they've had this tremendous Delta surge in cases, you see a very minimal Delta surge in deaths. So that shows clearly that vaccination prevents death in the vast majority of patients against the Delta variant. So vaccines, these are incredibly effective vaccines. Of course, they started off with efficacy rates or effectiveness rates of 95%. That has clearly faded with each successive variant that's come out. Delta now is between 65 and 85%, still effective. More than 50% is the definition. It is very effective at preventing hospitalization and death. And that is the key thing for these vaccinations. These are incredibly safe vaccines. The safety profile matches that of almost every other vaccine favorably and is being followed very, very closely. There are going to be breakthrough infections, particularly in populations where most people are vaccinated. If there's enough virus out there, those people are going to get infected. The good news is that hospitalization and deaths are lowered greatly by having been vaccinated. Not eliminated completely, but lowered greatly. So people ask me quite frequently about vaccine boosters. Well, there's sort of 3 different parts to this. One, there are individuals who were vaccinated who never converted, if you will. Those are individuals who are on immunosuppressive drugs for organ transplants, chemotherapy, biologics such as Remicade for Crohn's disease or rheumatoid arthritis. A 3rd dose will often result in conversion, and those patients should get subsequent boosters as soon as available. Then there's the typical waning or fading immune response, most severe in the elderly. And also it's important to remember that immunity from infection is not as strong and does not last as long as immunity from vaccination. So individuals who think because they had COVID before, they're safe for the long term, that's not true. Boosters are likely going to be needed for both of these first 2 groups. And it can be the booster of the same vaccine we had before. And then finally, at the bottom, you see that 3rd category, and that is if the antigen shifts or changes enough and we lose cross-variant immune protection, then we're going to need a booster shot that's actually a different vaccine, if you will, than what we received when these vaccines first became available. So children and COVID, of course, the headlines are scary. In 2020, we used to say, gee, pediatric infection is rare. Well, it may not have been as rare as we thought, but pediatric infection in general is quite mild. There is a multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, which is relatively rare. It's quite delayed. So 2020, it seemed like our kids were protected. And part of it, of course, our kids aren't in nursing homes, and they're mostly young and healthy, although not all. Well, 2021 is indeed the epidemic of the unvaccinated. And as I pointed out, the kids represent the largest group of unvaccinated people in our country. And it was announced this week that kids are now 25% of all new cases. Well, they're 25% of our population, so it sort of makes sense. Is Delta different in kids beyond its rapid spread compared to the previous forms? The best evidence right now is that is not. Of course, we want to protect our children and we want to protect our community. And the best way right now to do that is for all people who can get vaccinated to get vaccinated. Certainly adult parents of young kids should get vaccinated. That's how you protect your kids. We do have to realize we have to identify the risks and benefits of our decisions. And we have to accept that there's no such thing as zero risk. I think we've acknowledged after a year of shutdowns that there are critical educational and developmental needs of kids and teenagers. I don't think any of us wanted to be locked up with our parents for a year. So we got to get our kids back to school in person. And right now, that means measures such as masks and distancing to make it as safe as reasonably possible while the disease prevalence is high and our population is unvaccinated. Our population of kids is unvaccinated. Hopefully that situation will change soon. Pregnancy and COVID, this has been an interesting and terrible story. Having COVID during pregnancy greatly increases the problems with pregnancy, and being pregnant and catching COVID greatly increases the risk of a bad outcome from COVID. We're not talking 5 or 10%. We're talking 6 times, 8 times a worse outcome. So originally we said, like we typically do, if you're pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant, talk to your doctor. Well, the evidence is overwhelming. Get vaccinated. Get vaccinated. There is no question that individuals who are pregnant should be vaccinated. There are individuals who are thinking about becoming pregnant should get vaccinated. The vaccine is safe in pregnant women. The large study out of 100,000 pregnancies showed no increase in the risk of miscarriage. There's no decrease in fertility, and there's possible beneficial transference of what we call passive immunity, both with pregnancy and with breastfeeding after delivery. So the strongest recommendation is for people to get vaccinated. I mean, and the stories in social media here are terrible. Unvaccinated parents, mother gets COVID, gives birth, infant lives, mother dies, father critically ill on a ventilator, 5 kids now likely to be without parents. These are totally avoidable situations. Please, there's no question about vaccination and pregnancy. So the upcoming waves in Western New York, well, the Delta variant's here. It's 90 to 100% of our cases. In June, the adult Colina hospitals were down to 1 patient with COVID, compared to 200 and change in January. In August, that number has been bumping between 25, 30 to 40 per day. Hopefully stable, hopefully going down. But let's face it, we're going to see some kind of bump with return to school. We're going to see some kind of bump when the weather gets cold in October, end of October, November. The holidays are each going to be potential super spreader events. So we're going to see these bumps. We have to deal with them. The best way to deal with them is be smart. Get vaccinated. If you're in a crowd, wear a mask if indoors. It's really that simple. We have to realize there are going to be more variants. And again, we have to realize that there will be other viral infections. We have to plan and get smarter about how we deal with this. SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19 illness is the 3rd coronavirus infection to hit the world in the last 18 years, and it won't be the last. So please and thank you. My pleas, people need to take this seriously. I talk to a lot of people about this, and I'm amazed at some of the things people are saying and thinking, that everybody who died in 2020, they were old and were going to die anyway. Well, you know, in the last 3 quarters of 2020, there were 522,000 extra deaths compared to the last 3 quarters of each of the last 4 or 5 years. Okay, so take this seriously. This is a viral infection that is mild in most people and fatal in many. Okay, please stay safe. That means get vaccinated, as I've stressed so much. Mask when in crowded indoor spaces. Please follow the science. And I've asked people, be kind, but I have a sense of frustration. I want to be kind, but I also want people to be real. Someone comes to me with a paper saying, here, this shows that vaccines don't work. And I look at it and they've circled 10% of the conclusion. Well, they misread the 10% and they ignored the other 90% of the paper. So people need to get serious. They need to get real. We can get through this as a community and a country. It requires us to get about 10 to 15% more people vaccinated to push us to the point where the case numbers will go down and stay down. Thank you very much.